right, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. My name is Shay Ramquist. Most of you probably know me, but if you don't, I am the director of the Trinity U program here at Trinity. I also teach in the humanities department in the upper school. And the Trinity U program is designed to take all the wonderful things that we're doing in these classrooms every day and try to repackage them in a way that will be interesting and helpful for our parents and our friends of the school, because most of us didn't get a classical education, and maybe some of us feel like we're missing out, or at least there's a few things that would be cool if we could get along the way. So that's the goal of the Trinity U program overall. And we have these nights, usually about twice a year, where we try to take some time and really think together about something bigger that we're doing in the classrooms that might be beneficial to our community. So that's what we've done tonight with the Joe versus the volcano. I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute, but that's the goal of the Trinity U program. I also want to mention, as part of that, another branch of the Trinity U program is our podcast. And we happen to have both the host of the podcast here tonight, Mark Phillips, as well as he's been doing such a great job. Thank you, Mark. And then our latest guest, Jandy, who was just on talking about Much Ado About Nothing. And if you're not already subscribed, definitely recommend it, where we're going through a lot of the things that we study in the classroom, like Shakespeare, like the Odyssey, like Dante, and giving little bite-sized overviews so that you can understand some of the things that our students are learning about. So before I go any further, let me go ahead and pray for us, and we'll kind of begin the night in earnest. Heavenly Father, we thank you that you have created this world full of so many wonders. We thank you for the window into those wonders that art is able to give us, especially the art of film. Lord, I pray that tonight you would allow us to see some of your wonders, some of your beauty, some of your truth, that we would have a great time conversing and discussing and seeking truth together. Thank you for all of those that came out tonight, and I pray that you would bless this time and our conversation. I pray this in Jesus' name, amen. Well, if you didn't happen to make it to our showing tonight, I want to give you a quick overview of what we watched, and then give you an overview of what the discussion will look like for the rest of the evening. The movie was Joe versus the Volcano, which is one of the most profound films with the silliest titles ever. It's Tom Hanks in the title role of Joe Banks is his name, and he is a retired firefighter who now has a terrible job in this soulless factory, and he doesn't feel good, and something's wrong with him. In the first scene, almost the very first thing he says after kind of scuffing the bottom of his shoe, he's looking at his shoe, and he tells the character, I think I'm losing my soul, which kind of gives you a sense of what this movie is going to be about, where there's lots of layers of symbolism and meaning going on under the surface. So he's been to many doctors, and finally a doctor can put his finger on what's wrong with him since he doesn't feel well, which is he has a brain cloud in his head, and he's going to feel perfect until about 6 months later he's going to die. And this is actually a great relief to him to learn that he's going to die. And so he decides to change his life. He quits his job. He finally asks out the girl that's been sitting across from him for years and years and years. And then when things go wrong with her, the next morning is approached by this man, Samuel Graynamore, who has an offer. If he will decide to freely jump into a volcano for purposes of Graynamore, then he can, as the guy says, live like a king and die like a man. He will fund him, give him an endless, credit card, several credit cards, and he can live high on the hog for a bit and then go out and meet his death. So along the way, he is able to fly to Los Angeles. He meets another girl, and the three main girls in this movie are all played by the same lady, Meg Ryan, which is very strange. Maybe we'll talk about what's going on with that. She is very shallow, just like LA. There's definitely an anti-LA bias in this movie that we should maybe talk about that too. Then he moves beyond her. He gets on this yacht to go to the island that's in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. The yacht is helmed by the third version of Meg Ryan. Her name is Patricia. The boat goes down. They are saved by these trunks that he's managed to purchase. And then they make it to the island. And should I spoil it? Should I tell the people if they haven't seen it? He has to march up to the top of the volcano. He and Patricia have a shotgun wedding right at the top of the edge of the volcano because they. That's true. That's true. Some fish slapping has happened, and then they plunge into the volcano to their death. Except a miracle occurs. They're rejected, or maybe they're transformed. I'm not sure. And they are sent out, and they are saved. But the volcano goes down with the islanders on it. So that's the movie. Very strange movie. Very symbolic movie. And I'm excited to discuss it first with our panel and then with all of you. This is definitely an audience participation night. I hope you're ready to talk about these types of things, whether you've seen the movie or not. So let me introduce our panel, and then I'd like each member of the panel to maybe say 5 or 10 minutes worth of things that you thought were significant about the movie, things that you want us to see about the movie from your unique perspective. Then we'll probably have a little bit of a discussion up here. I'll try to moderate it and ask them a few more questions, go a little bit deeper. And then I'd love to hear from you guys if you want to ask the panel questions or if there's things that struck you about whether you saw the movie tonight or you've seen it before, things that you want to bring up, questions you have, insights that you have about the movie, and some of the bigger themes that the movie is addressing. So let me introduce our panel. We have Mr. Chris Lee. He is a humanities teacher here at Trinity, is currently teaching philosophy and European history. Pretty big film fan. We have Mr. Mark Gold. Mark is the teacher of our film class here at Trinity, and part of the reason we're doing this tonight is because it's a window into part of the way that we approach film and teaching that to our students here at Trinity, which makes sense living in the shadow of Tinseltown down the road. That's a pretty big cultural influence on our students and on all of us. Mark is also a filmmaker. How many films have you directed? 2 films so far. Over 100 episodes of TV, too. And then we have Jandy Hardesty. Jandy is our literature teacher here at Trinity. Can you tell everybody, maybe if they haven't heard the podcast, what your personal challenge was when you were growing up with film? You can speak into the microphone.
You mean what I said what we talked about on the podcast?
Yeah.
When I was a teenager, I memorized all the major Academy Awards from 1928 through, that was the 90s, so into the 90s. So the top 5 or 6. Yeah. I can't remember them all anymore. I checked to see how many I could remember. No. Like, who won them? Who won the Academy Awards?
In all the top 5 major categories, too, so not just Best Picture.
Picture, director, actor, actress, supporting actor. Yeah.
And also, you saw a lot of those films, too, right? All the way back to the dawn of cinema.
Yes, so. I think up through about 2010, there's maybe 3 Academy Award Best Pictures I haven't seen.
Yeah. So we got a pretty good panel for you tonight. I'm excited to hear their thoughts. I thought we'd start with maybe Mr. Gould and you telling us maybe more of a pure cinematic approach or whatever you want to see. And then we go to maybe Chris and then to Jandy, and then we'll open it up.
Sure. It was when you asked me to be on this panel and you said the movie, I was like, wow, I think I saw that in 1992 on a VHS tape. It's been that long since that film came out. And I was an undergrad at New Mexico State, and I was studying theater at the time. But it was great to visit this film again because I had so many mixed emotions. And back then I was like, what is that film about? And I kind of like forgot about it. And I watched it about 10 years ago, and I was sucked into it again. And it's one of those films you have to watch a couple of times, I feel like, in order to start understanding the meaning of it. But cinematically, I really enjoy this film because it's almost like 3 different styles of filmmaking. You start out at the very beginning of the film, and it seems to me like the director was definitely going for this realism of. Actually, obviously, How many people have not seen the film? There's 1, 2. Okay, that's fine. 3. The first part of the film is very cinematic in the sense I remember even in watching this, I continue to go, wow. He's really reaching towards a realism of a deep depression of somebody and trying to pull out this feeling of what the community was and what life was like, especially in the 90s. We were going through a transition at the time in the 90s of this crazy 80s, and then we're hitting the 90s, and you have these new bands singing these dark songs going out, and they were coming out at the time. And I was like, what he was depicting at the time was he was saying, you know, I've looked at some of the, I was looking at stuff today, and they were saying that, you know, it was about capitalism and how capitalism is taking over. And I think what I really thought was interesting with the filmmaking is we got this blue, cold colors that we have at the beginning. And these really, you see the flower that's stepped on at the beginning, the little daisy and stuff like that. And he's really digging into the neon lights going, and you hear the sound effects. He really hit the sound effects a lot in this and used the music and the songs that were chosen. I mean, I don't have the list of them, but they were incredible songs. Helped tell the story of this depression and what he's digging into and where he's at. And you see this all feeling very uncomfortable. And Tom Hanks has the worst wig that I could ever think of. I was sitting there going, they could have got a better wig for this. But it's ultimately, you're laughing, but you're also feeling the depression, especially at that time. I feel in the 90s when people were coming out of that. And then you have him walk into the doctor's office. And it's very obvious for people who see it. You have these blue, this dark, you know, kind of the cold, eerie feeling. And then you have this warm setting of a doctor's office. And he plays with these colors and plays cinematically with you with sound effects, music, and helps you tell the story. And this was his really big debut for filmmaking. And what was incredible with it is I loved watching that shot as he walks into the doctor's office, and he's almost relieved to find out that he's going to die. And you're like going, wow, his life is really bad. But I think it's all set up really well. And then from then, color becomes exuberant. And all of a sudden, we're starting to see these colors, and we're feeling warm. So I feel that part of that film, that first section, which we would call our acts. We teach acts 1, 2, and 3 in film school here, so that I could match what's going on here at Trinity. They teach plays. It's the same thing. We work with in Act 1, and Act 2, and Act 3. Plays are the same way, right, Mr. Ramquist? That's how we work, and we think in that way. So he took that first act. Then he took cinematically, we went into all kinds of color. And it was almost like Pretty Woman, like when he's going through that stage. And then in the second act, we find that has a goal and that he's moving towards something. He has this goal of, I'm going to die, I'm going to enjoy every single person that I can, not just my life. He said, my life is boring, but I find it's other people now. And we see this goal, and it becomes this moment of us waiting for him to get that point as the character, and we have that in our second act, is he's going to come to the conclusion that he's going to die, and he doesn't want to. He wants to live longer now that he's fallen in love. But then this last part, and I've always struggled with it, is this magical realism at the end, with them shooting out of a volcano and into the water. And that's how I think the film was set up very well, that he's sitting here telling you, I'm telling you a story about humanity here. And I'm going to give you a second to really question humanity. But I'm also going to make this a deep meaning. Your faith. What do you believe in? And I think by shooting him out, he could have died. We could have saw so many endings that we wanted. But I believe it was a perfect ending. As crazy as it was, I think it's a perfect ending because we have our faith. And especially now, I'm actually thinking of like showing this to my students now and asking them how this is a faith-based film. Because our belief in God is always a step into the volcano. And that's the way I think that you may be rocketed out of the volcano, you may be sucked into the volcano. In this instance, they were rocketed out. I wouldn't like my father-in-law if I was him from here on because he was about to kill him. But you are either shot out and God will protect you, God will take you, but you have to take that step of faith. And that's what I really loved about this film, is that it built up to that moment from a very dreary, questionable, like, oh my gosh, this is a depressing film, to like hope into something that we can believe in. So that's my little shtick so far on the film. Which way?
But this one's on loud. So this is one of my all-time favorite films, which is a little perhaps odd because the film is very odd. But I love it, and one of the reasons that I love it is that it speaks to it digs deep into the sort of constant story, the sort of grand story of Western mythos that is constantly going on. He starts on this crooked road. He's losing his soul, and he is relieved to discover that he is going to die, in part because that actually allows him to realize that life was worth living. Right? He's been selling his life for $300 a week for years, and that by itself is enough you could almost stop the movie at that point and just think for days on, what am I selling my life for? I can't get any of that time back. It's just gone. His one fight against the dreariness of it all is this sad musical light that his boss still comes to attack because his boss is a terrible man. And the Wattori name also has always reminded me of the Waponi Wu, the Wattori. It's the same kind of idea. I was thinking about tonight, it's also a little odd that the entire business that he works for is making fake arms and, pardon me, but fake other anatomical parts of the body related to life. They're all fake related to life. It's not living, it's artificial. It's to stand in place of real life. And so he discovers that he's going to die, and he comes out, and it's Ray Charles, Old Man River, just keeps rolling along. He gives this Great Dane a big hug, gives this old lady a hug, and all of a sudden, he can't waste any more time. And after telling off his boss, he takes the girl out for a date. You gotta appreciate it's the same girl, but there's three versions of it. It's very, we're talking about it, there's an Odysseus nature to this whole thing, but actually it reminds me a lot more of Dante in a lot of ways. This woman, this beauty, is the thing leading him through in some ways. But she's not the point either, because he's discovering something more than just love. If this was simply a rom-com where he falls in love with a woman and that was really the point, we would come up, I think, wanting. There would be something missing ultimately, because Joe would not have discovered something that was intrinsically important and true. He would have just found the beauty of romance, which is great. Romance and love is wonderful, but that is not what man is made for. So he asks Dee Dee out for a date, and he pays the musicians a song to set our hearts on fire and mad with love, and he's wild with passion. But, he scares her off because he's going to die. This is a terrible, just because you're going to die doesn't mean that I am prepared to face my death, which is, again, another great point. She's watched the whole thing. She knows every part of it except for the fact that he's dying of the brain cloud. And her response is, no, I'm going to go back to this terrible place, and I'm just going to keep on slowly dying and selling my life for $300 a week. And then he has a new opportunity, and then we meet the mentor, right? The mentor to help him find himself. You're coming into focus, kid, as we finally shed the worst wig of all time. Almost the worst wig of all time, but definitely a terrible wig. I love the different mentors that talk to him, though, between the limousine driver who stops the car impatiently and says, clothes are a very important thing. I believe clothes make the man. How you appear is something about yourself. But but then he actually has patience for him and begins to help him. And, you know, when Joe picks that hat, I don't think any of us agree that that's a good hat to pick, but that's Joe's hat. Joe wants that hat. It's a stupid hat, but he wants the hat. And then one of my all-time favorite characters, the luggage man. There are very few moments more wonderful. The intensity of the the primary occupation of my life has been the consideration of luggage, and that luggage will play an integral role in his surviving this ultimate story. In fact, on the other side of this, going all the way forward, they'll still be floating on the luggage that he gets from this moment. That will actually be the thing above all other things that actually survives and carries them on into the next thing. So that luggage is not a throwaway. Actually, he picks up a necessity that it is vital that a man have the right luggage. Make of that what you will. Somewhere there's an important proverb there that luggage makes the man, but I think literally we're talking about how we prepare ourselves for the journey ahead. It's not a light thing. We often think it's nothing, but actually, Joe tells us this is integral. And then we come to the third, of course, right? We're going to ascend the third act with the third portion of our journey. Skipping quickly over Patricia, who is sad and makes me sad. And we could go into Patricia. Angelica, there it is, Angelica. Patricia, I like, yes. Angelica, wow, it's Angelica. Oh, gosh. A sad name for a sad, yeah, that's not good. Angelica is so broken. She breaks crabs, and it's just, Patricia, right? She's a wonderful muse in this sense. She actually is not complete herself, and so where Joe maybe went for physical intimacy with Dee Dee and then hoped for emotional intimacy with Angelica, he and Patricia actually don't engage in physical intimacy and begin the journey into some kind of emotional intimacy, just as life rears up and the Tweedledee is lost, and then he's alone again. She's there and he has to take care of her, but he's alone. And while he's taking care of her, again, we're seeing this development of a life with purpose. The heroism that we were told about Joe comes into play. He's brave in the face of terror, but he's also experiencing something transcendental, right? The moon, probably one of the holiest moments I've seen in film is when he sees the moon and speaks directly to God. I forgot how big. That is a desperately, deeply transcendent moment that I think every time I watch it, I reflect on how easy we forget that moon is there, and we like Joe need to be reminded of how big it is. That goes into a whole bunch of other films, right? But as they get to the island and they go up and they prepare to jump off, even Patricia's final reflection as they get ready to jump off is this: well, we don't know what will happen, so let's just do this thing. She's not afraid of death, and he's kind of submitted himself to death, even though it was kind of foolish, and maybe you should get a second opinion when the doctor tells you have a brain cloud. But they decide to go through with it, and then the island rejects them. And I actually would say the island spits them out, and you've got the icon of the big woo, which I've always laughed because this is a stupid islander who's decided to I'm gonna be the persona of the big woo, and I'm gonna be spooky and awful to everybody. Woo, and but everybody is doomed because the Waponi are also actually not really much better than everything else. So when we're left at the end of the film, where are we going? Like Odysseus and like Dante, we're going far from the things of man. We don't know, but tomorrow will be something more beautiful and grand than we've seen thus far. It's going to be, as they head off towards that moon, something utterly redeeming and beautiful. I love the film.
Okay, is it? Okay, awesome. Well, I had seen the movie years ago, but had forgotten most of it. So I kind of hesitantly, when Shay asked me, I was like, okay, sure, I do like movies. I'll watch it again. Hopefully I can come up with something. And I've been doing a deep dive into fairy tales this year. And so imagine my excitement when the film started, and it immediately starts with Once Upon a Time, the universal opening of a fairy tale. And I was like, okay, I know what I'm looking for now. And it's all in here. Like, so many fairy tale elements are in here. We start off with a character named Joe, which is the classic everyman name. This is just a regular guy who could be any of us on a spiritual journey. And he has to go on an identity quest. He asks, who am I? That's the real question, right? Who am I? And then that takes on further significance when he needs to get new clothes. And I do also love that scene with the limo driver, because he's just like, oh, I need to get some clothes. The limo driver says, okay, where do you want to go? He's like, well, I don't know. He's like, okay. And then the limo driver stops the car and says, I'm here to drive the limo. I can't tell you who you are, because clothes are who you are. And that is very true in fairy tales. Clothes equal identity. When there's a change of clothes in a fairy tale, when someone changes clothes, they have changed identities. It's a very clear marker. So that's a big one. He has to figure out who is the false women, which women should he go with, which ones should he follow, which one should he stay with. He has to reject 2 and end up with 1. 3 is a big number in fairy tales. There's 3 women. There is, in one way, this is not an impossible task, but in another way, it is. Having to throw yourself into a volcano is an impossible task in some ways. It is a major thing that he has to do. Impossible tasks are big things in fairy tales. And the guy who gives him the task is named Gray No More. Gray no more. He makes his life become less gray. In some ways, he's a magical helper. Think about Cinderella or Snow White, have animals that come and help her all the time. They give grace, they give help, and he has someone who comes and gives him money out of nowhere, and then later he has someone who comes and helps him get clothes, and then someone who helps him get luggage. So 3 magical helpers in a row. When he's getting that wig off and his real hair on, his true self, the hairdresser tells him, you look like a prince in a fairy tale. I'm not making this up. We have a journey motif, which is also tied to identity quest. He's got to go somewhere to find out who he is. And he has to go along crooked roads, which we've seen at the beginning. He has a crooked road. At the very end, he makes that explicit. He says, I had to follow a lot of crooked roads to get here. The second girl, Angelica, you mentioned her name. Why is she named Angelica? Names have a meaning. I'm not sure. Is she an angel? She's a messenger, though. Angels are messengers. She takes him where he needs to be. I think he also learned something from each of the women that he is with for a little bit. I like how you pointed out that Dee Dee's not even willing. As soon as he says, I'm dying, she's like, nope, I'm out. Angelica is actually suicidal. She's like, have you ever thought about killing yourself? And he's like, what? And I'm like, dude, you're literally going to kill yourself. But he's horrified that she would. Yeah, exactly. He's already dying. But she has a fear of, it's interesting, this connection between a fear of dying and a fear of living, and in some ways they're the same thing. If you're not willing to face your death, are you actually going to be able to live a valuable life? Patricia, I'm not sure about her name. I haven't figured it out. It's from Father, right? She's mad at her father because he's never around. So absentee fathers are also big in fairy tales. Fathers are never around. They never do what they actually need to do, how they actually need to take care of their children. They're never there. And then they have just this amazing, there's this storm. She is knocked off the boat, and he has to dive in and save her. So which I think is fascinating that we actually have 2 times that he sacrifices himself, potentially. And he manages to pull her up onto these wonderful pieces of luggage and make a raft. But they're there for about 3 days. That's significant. 3 days is always significant. 3 days and 3 nights. She's unconscious the whole time. So I want to suggest that we might see this as a death and a resurrection, that she wakes up on the 3rd day, the day after he has that epiphany experience with the moon. And then at the end, we've all mentioned when they're spit out of the volcano, and I'm still working through some of that myself. Maybe we can talk more about that, why that exactly happens. But it seems, you called it magical realism. I do think it's a perfect ending. I think it fits into Tolkien's idea of the eucatastrophe, which is, catastrophe is something bad, right? But eu means good, so it's a good catastrophe. It's a sudden turn that's unexpected toward joy. And that is the Christian story, that we have a world that is completely fallen and broken and ruined, and then something that could never be predicted happens. God comes to earth as a human being and dies for us, and then is resurrected. And all of those things we couldn't have predicted or expected on our own, except for all of the stories that he told us to expect it. And this is the same way, I think. It's unexpected grace. And fairy tales often end this way, of where everything seems really bad, and then there just is an unexpected thing that happens that makes everything come right. And then they get spit out of the volcano, and they're like, what happened? But we're still in the middle of the ocean, and we're just going to drown now. And then what happens? The luggage comes back, just pops up right next to them, and they're like, whoa. I guess we're meant to live, and wherever we go. This luggage is going with us. But that's a moment of unexpected grace and undeserved grace in some ways. But in other ways, he's been working toward this the whole movie. So that's.
Thank you. On the luggage theme, one thing that struck me this time that I watched it through was that the double doors that the luggage salesman opens are with these Gothic arches and these blue, almost like heavenly clouds in the windows there. And when they open it up, almost like a heavenly choir kind of sings, and we look at it. And it's certainly done for comedic effect, but I almost wonder if there's something deeper going on there about the church symbolically as being this supportive thing in the background. The guy who wrote and directed this, John Patrick Shanley, has a Catholic background. He also wrote the play and then the movie Doubt. So maybe something going on there, but hard to read in. I'm not sure how far we should go with that. You said 3 is a good number. I have 3 kind of burning questions I want to ask you guys, and they're in kind of maybe increasing complexity, and maybe the last one could carry us out into more broader participation. So here's my first question, which is, there is a recurring symbolic image in the movie of this crooked lightning, right? The first time we see it, it's the pathway that all the drone workers are drudging towards the terrible factory. We also see it as the symbol of the factory itself, their logo that recurs throughout the imagery of the factory. But then we see it again on the wall of Joe's very terrible apartment. There's this kind of crack in the plaster that also mirrors that. It shows up in the lightning bolt that strikes and destroys the boat, the Tweedledum. And then it's the pathway up to the mountain where they're going to jump in, right? So very intentionally, there's this image repeated over and over like a motif. What's going on with that? What do you guys see from each of your perspectives is happening with that image? Any thoughts?
Yeah, so the first thing I would say is that it's clear that it's not merely the bad, right? I think the very first time you watch it and you notice the crooked, you think about the fact that it's at the factory. Oh no, it's bad. It's at the but it keeps occurring in eucatastrophe. I was thinking of eudaimonia, but yeah, eucatastrophe. Catastrophic moments of even that ship getting hit by the lightning. That's a catastrophe, and yet, if it hadn't been for the ship being hit by the lightning, Joe would not have had those 3 days of contemplation in a wilderness, so to speak, of the ocean by himself. And he does go not merely down, but he also goes up. It's a crooked path, as he reflects, that brings him to this thing. But this place that he finally is achieving, and the place that he's finally come to, is not where he doesn't want to be. It's far better than the place that he was in, and it's better than even many cases he hoped he would ever achieve. So it's a crooked path that leads us, but it's a crooked path that ultimately, just like it does come down in lightning, I think there may also be an aspect of it where it literally is reaching up to heaven and is part of the soul's path towards something more. We see it all the way down in that pit of the work, where it's not really good, but that's just the beginning. And if you do stay at the beginning, then you will stay in a terrible pit. But that's not where you should stop.
I don't know that I have more than Chris said. Yeah, because I'm glad you said that, because I was, at first when I was working through this, connecting the factory with the volcano only, but there are clearly other times. I think with it being lightning, like light is important. Like light is inspiration, light is a bolt from above. Light is, you can only see if you have light. You have to learn to see in order to know what is right and what to do. So all those kinds of things I'm thinking about. And then the presumed problem that he has, right, is a cloud, a brain cloud, which is interesting because it's actually a cloud in this case that helps him to be able to see. But lightning also comes from clouds. So, I mean, I think there's something there. I'm still just kind of moving toward it.
Let me set you up then with the question related to this. Am I right to think that this is an important image, like just in terms of film vocabulary? If a director puts in something like that repeatedly, should I be wanting to read more into that? Or it's not just accidental, right?
I was gonna say sometimes they put stuff in specifically for you to really think through things, and then I think people interpret things the way they want to as you make the film. But I'm sitting there, this is too many times that it's in there that it's not meant to be something, and I'm like trying to absorb. I think Chris nailed it on the head, of what it was about. But the lightning, obviously, he made a decision to go save her instead of staying on the boat. And that's a pretty significant time in the story. So he jumps out, and then the lightning hits there. So it's almost, to me, I was like listening and going, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Probably he had that there to prove the point of Joe's on this adventure that God's kind of put in him through this whole time. The lightning starts at the very beginning, like you said, at the workhouse, and then we see, where was the other one? I didn't see the one in his house. Was it in his house? Like and I was like, bad crack in his wall. I did not catch that with it. But these little nuggets you can find each time. I also think that I did notice that as they were walking up the path, not only did the filmmaker have that path, he emphasized the lightning bolt. He took everything from the side and emphasized on it. And that's also another point within the story, where is he going to make that decision, another decision point within it. And obviously if the lightning bolt was in the wall, he's, all of a sudden he has that decision point. Is he going to take on this task? So yeah, evidently that's pretty obvious.
All right, here's my second question. It's going to take some time to set it up, so bear with me. I'm not sure what to make of the character of Samuel Gray anymore. In one way, his offer to Joe seems almost like a temptation, almost demonic, where there's this big theme of selling your soul in the movie, right? Joe has just complained that he's selling his soul for $300 a week. And now Graynamore shows up and says, I would like you to basically sell your soul to me. I would like to buy your soul. Here are all these credit cards, right? And then just, die so that I can maybe, continue making huge amounts of money. And I think you were talking about where this fits in 90s filmography, right? Following this, we have this terrific montage based on the credit cards. Now he can go remake himself, new haircut, new clothes, right? Suddenly he's a new man. Well, the most famous 90s montage, right, almost the same year, is Pretty Woman, right? Yeah, 2 weeks later, right? Where a woman of the street takes the credit cards of this silver-haired benefactor, right? And goes in and remakes herself, sort of, but this is a very icky relationship, right? He is paying for her to be his woman, right? But not in a proper relationship. And that whole movie has a different trajectory, but that seems bad, right? Mostly it seems bad. But the way that he convinces Joe, the clincher, is when he says, live like a king, die like a man, right? And he seems to be offering Joe this better version of himself. He says, I see a hero in here, right? He's like, there's a hero. Where's that hero? And he calls back to who he was and wants him to live up to this version of Joe that he's almost forgotten about himself. So that seems maybe positive. And then Patricia on the boat has this wonderful quote where she says, my father says almost the whole world is asleep. Everyone you know, everyone you talk to. He says only a few people are truly awake, and they live in a state of constant and total amazement. Right? So it's a wonderful quote. It seems like Joe is one of those people who was asleep, and part of the journey that he needs to go on in this film is becoming awake. And she's saying her father, Graynamore, is the one who has this insight into the world. So what is going on with his character? Is he a positive character? Should we trust him, right? Is he, like you're saying, Jandy, in the fairy tales, this magical helper to spur Joe on his quest? Is he a Luciferian character who's tempting him to gain the whole world and lose his soul? I'm confused. I really am. I'm not sure what to make of it. What do you guys think?
Well, I would say magical helpers don't have to be unequivocally good. Rumpelstiltskin is a magical helper. He gives her the means to not get killed by the king, but then he also wants to take something from her. And so I'm not sure I have an easy answer to your question, because I think in a way he's kind of both. I mean, I don't think you have to say one or the other. It is interesting to me that he is there and he pops in to make this offer, and then we never see him again. We only see him through his daughters, which is funny to me that two of the girls are his daughters, and now I want to know Dee Dee's last name. But yeah, I copied down that quote too, because I think that's actually really interesting, because what he's saying is that if you truly understood the world around you, just the incredible world that God has given us, then we should constantly be like, oh my, this is amazing. Everything is just exactly. We should have that reaction that he has to the moon. Even at the very beginning, he makes that same gesture to heaven, even while he's still in the terrible job.
So sad.
Yeah, he clearly knows that it's not everything. But yeah, that's not really an answer to say that he's both, and maybe someone else can clarify more.
Sure. Yeah, I would say he reminds me actually a lot. Rumpelstiltskin's a great fairy tale call out. I would say he also reminds me of any number of sort of Greek gods where we have both good and bad coming out of the same hand. It has always been a little troubling to hear a profound word come from Patricia on behalf of her father, who the only experience we have is, this all seems very shady. How did you get the information from a doctor that this man's dying, and now you want to pay him to go die? And but in that way, maybe he is, again, maybe he is. So I know we've already set up the idea that maybe there's a Catholic-ish kind of Christian-esque pattern going on in the background. We might also, in keeping with the fairy tales and sort of general mythic theme, say that there might also be this kind of idea of he might almost be like the lightning, where we see him in different places and we don't know that crooked path. If it was straight and obvious, it'd be easy to discern which side he falls on, but he owns the crooked path. He is the master of that crooked path, and so his ways are mysterious, and he kind of shows up offering Joe an opportunity to, ostensibly, you could just jump in and provide for Buburo, yeah, this special superconductor material, or, well, his daughters will be involved, and Joe is going to take the one daughter that most wants to be free off into far from the things of man. There's something deeply redemptive here, and maybe there's an idea that Dad, which also there's this idea of like he's unseen, and we talk about him in these sort of oblique terms. He's kind of lingering. That has a lot of that sort of God-ish, lower G feel to it. Of, well, we don't really see him, but he's kind of working and moving in the side or in the awning, and he has these purposes that keep kind of coming up, fate kind of thing, moving. So he does seem also, doesn't really seem to have ever hurt Joe, apart from the fact that because why is Joe at the doctor? Joe's there because he's a hypochondriac. Joe has been wasting his life. Joe is persuaded that there is something wrong with him, even when there's no evidence that there's anything wrong with him. It's only because he's a hypochondriac that we find this brain cloud.
He is soul sick.
He is soul sick. He's lost his soul, right?
I guess the apple was pretty easy to convince him, because he just said, okay, I'll do it. And that was it. He just said, I'll do it. It was not a problem. I just find it at the very end of the film, her explaining that this is kind of the father pretty much sets you up to die, at the end. And we'd never see the father again. I was expecting to see the father maybe at the island when I was, like, father's going to show up and we're going to get to see that. Nope. We don't see him,
Okay, so maybe we're going too deep on the image systems, but the first thing that we see when he knocks on the door, right, goes knock, 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 right, and it's his face, right, big, Lloyd Bridges, right, and then he shows his cane, which is a duck, right?
The duck is on the island. There's a duck on the luggage.
The duck,
on the island.
yeah, is on the luggage very prominently, like quacking, laughing at him. So I don't know if that was a callback there. Also, I saw something online that was pointing out that the doctor in the doctor's office, when Joe stands up, he goes to the mantle, and right next to him on the mantle is also a duck. So I don't know, right? That could be reading too deeply into that.
No.
But no?
No, I think it's there purposefully. I just can't get over the fact that he wasn't going, Mayday, Mayday. Every time I see him, I think of Airplane when he walks in there. So it's hard for me to get away from Airplane. But he did. It was, I think, setting that character up for just that one scene and going, you can finally have everything you want. The clothes, the credit cards, whatever you want. You have a day to do that. Then you're going to have all these luxuries all the way. I think that's just that temptation that he allowed. And I think it's purposeful, since he wrote it and directed it.
Well, so that idea of you can have everything you want leads to my last of the three questions, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, and I'd love to broaden it out to hear your responses as well in the audience. And this is kind of the kind of question that I would launch in one of my discussion sections, so we'll see how this works or not. So the question is, what is wrong with Joe at the start of the movie? And is he cured by the end? And if so, how? So I'll ask that again. What is wrong with Joe at the start of the movie? And is he cured by the end? And if so, how is he cured, if he is?
So, what's wrong with him? We said he's soul sick. I would say, specifically, he seems to be, what's the nature of his temptation? He's terrified of death, which is ironic because his cure, in some ways, is the reality that he's going to die. He even says, why? Why did I allow myself to lose my life for $300? And I know what it was. Fear. Freaking fear, right? I was too afraid to just do something. I was afraid. It's this risk idea. It's this, if I try, if I dare, I will lose. He's afraid. Ultimately, he's afraid of life because he's afraid of death, and life results in death. But that is true. Invariably, life results in death. So actually, by learning that he's going to die, weirdly, he is freed from this fear. And so the temptation, it's an odd thing to say it's a temptation, but the temptation that's put before him is, what if I allowed you, finally, to live like there is no tomorrow, and I gave you the means to do it? Because, one, you already know there's no tomorrow. It's actually been told to you, finally. You have full knowledge you're going to die. 6 months. But you'll be perfectly healthy until you just stop living. Well, that's great. So I don't have to worry about anything. I'm not feeling bad. I'm just afraid of feeling bad. So I can live, really live my life. So the temptation is actually to maybe just be kind of selfish and, hedonistic, I suppose, in enjoying himself all the way through. But he also, and this to the second part of your question, is he cured by the end? He definitely starts to. He's on a path where quickly living is not going to be defined as merely pleasure. One, he notices that he's alone, and the film does a really poignant job of pointing out that the loneliness is not something that his money can cure. The limo driver has a family to go back to, and so Joe is alone. And Joe acknowledges that and says sometimes there are things you gotta go through alone. So then he goes into his next phase, and he's looking for relationship, but she's not there to give relationship, and so then he's set adrift, and he's still alone after making a somewhat potential meaningful relationship. Then he's alone because maybe she's dead while he's out there amongst everything. It is kind of funny. We get to laugh because he comes back and, well, but still, we're out here in the middle of nowhere, and there's no land in sight. He's still kind of worrying about things, but she laughs at it with him, and then he just sort of relaxes away from it. So we actually get to laugh at the idea that, are we really we're gonna have jumped into a volcano, be spit out, and our luggage will float up next to us, and you're gonna worry about how we're gonna get through tomorrow? Come on.
Can I add kind of a follow-up question to your question? Because what I think Chris is exactly right, but the thing that's interesting to me is that he was a character before the movie. We hear about his former job and his former life. He was a firefighter who was willing to, save 2 people and then run back into a burning building to save the 3rd one. So he wasn't afraid of death then. So what happened? Why does he go from this character who is heroic, who is a hero, who does know how to live and face death, to what he becomes at the beginning of the movie? And I don't know the answer to that.
He saw some things.
He saw some things.
I feel like he's a I feel like he's a hypochondriac at the beginning, and I think he isn't cured, but now he has somebody with him to point it out. And so what I think is really interesting with this film was, like, we see this dark side of this guy who has come to that point. What we didn't get to see the history of it, but we see that he's lonely, and we're made here, and God has made it very clear that we're here to be in communion with one another, have relationships with one another. And you've isolated him, even him walking in the crowds at the very beginning, and we see that he's in his head and that there's something wrong, and he becomes prey to the Father. because he has these issues. And then in the end, when they're sitting there, he starts to do this again, and he starts to become nervous, and and she just says, silly. Well, he still has it. But now he has somebody to point it out to him and comfort him and have that community. So he's not cured. I don't think he's going to be cured anytime soon. But the objective and the brass ring in the end was he wanted something more and somebody there. And I think he did get that. And that's where I think that story comes to a full turn. I'd love to hear what you guys think on that, too.
Can I add one more thing? Yeah, I think that idea of community is really good. That's what he needed, and that's what he has at the end. I think it's interesting that when he's talking with Angelica in the car, and she asks him, have you ever thought about killing yourself? And he's horrified, and he's, finds out a little bit about her issues, and he says to her, "Why don't you just take the leap and see what happens? Stop depending on your father's money, stop living in LA, move somewhere else, do something else." And she's too scared to do it. She's like, that just is too terrifying to even think about. And then Patricia says exactly those words back to him when they're on the mouth of the volcano. She says, let's just take the leap and see what happens. And she wasn't there for that conversation with Angelica. She didn't hear him say that. So,
Was she?
Or was she? But I think that's really meaningful that I think that's how you know that she is the right girl. He's rejected the two wrong ones and chosen the right one because she knows that's true. But also, I think he needs someone else to say that back to him. He can't be the only one to be willing to say that.
Yeah, so I think what I hear you guys saying is a big theme in this film is the readiness to face your fears, in particular the fear of death. And that's one of the things that's wrong with him, is that he is unwilling to really come to grips with his mortality. Right? The title, it's a terrible title. It took me a long time to figure out what's going on with it. But I think really, is like you're pointing out, Jandy, it's, Joe, everyday Joe, right? This kind of avatar for humans. So man versus the volcano, this crazy image of death, right? Man versus death. How do we live with the knowledge that we are going to die? And by actually kind of seeing this image that we're going to die, that actually unlocks things for him, and him kind of willing to face that head on. It reminds me a little bit of the medieval tradition of the memento mori, right? Something that Christians would often do is have maybe a skull on the table, and you would remind yourself, oh, I am from dust, and to dust I will return, right? That's an important Christian practice. And yet that also fits with something that's pretty big in the cinema in the 1990s especially, and in some of the philosophy, which is this kind of view of existentialism, which, to really boil it down and make it simple, is recognizing, yes, we are all going to die. The universe is fundamentally meaningless, just random things happen, and the important thing to do is to make your own meaning, right? Maybe that often is by investing in relationships, right? So I guess one of the questions as we kind of broaden out to you all is, do you think that that is his problem? Is his problem that he needs to face death? He needs connection, community, relationship, and does that cure him? Is there something else going on with what his problem is, or some way that he is cured through the film? And then I guess the bigger question is, how does this connect to what we see as Christians as the fundamental problem with man? Is this film just an existentialist message saying, it fits within an atheistic worldview that, we're all going to die, so just hold on to somebody that makes meaning together? Or is this a fundamentally Christian film? Because there are many Christological elements in this. So with that, let me come out into the audience for the recording. If you wouldn't mind waiting for me to come around with a mic, I'd love to hear what you guys think, your questions. Let's transition to this next phase of our night. Those are really big questions. Don't feel like you have to answer all of them all at once. If you have any little bit of insight, I'd love to hear.
Hey. So I was thinking that the Grey No More character really reminds me of the story of Faust, the devil at the crossroads. And he does, I think that I can say that he is a evil, deceptive character, given the fact that he, as you said, tempted him. First he coerces him, even though he doesn't know. He sends him to his doctor and knows all of his stuff. I'm thinking as a nurse, HIPAA, oh my gosh, right? But, Joe seems mostly unfazed by that, just as he's unfazed when he's cracking holes in his walls. But, he thinks that he's found Joe's price, and he thinks he completely understands Joe. But I feel like we can know that he's a malicious character because he has figured out the price for his daughter Angelica, and she's become suicidal because of it. And he, after a long time of Patricia being able to be free from her father, he's figured out her price as well. That's one of the things I love about Patricia. Unlike Angelica, who's fake like the city she is in, our first real conversation with Patricia is her being very honest and saying of herself that she's soul weary. Anyway, I think it's interesting though because I agree with Jandy. I think that is a beautiful observation about 3 days and 3 nights, during which Patricia is completely knocked out and he meets God, and we have a resurrection. And so in a way, I feel like the volcano trumps the evil, devilish character. Because first off, on the boat, Joe has an opportunity to do something that he used to do. He used to dive into dangerous places to save. And we actually ran home to watch it on a couch instead of in chairs, but we had someone join us that hadn't seen it yet, and he was observing, gosh, he's taking a really long time to save her, like she's drowning. And both of us were going, no, but you don't understand, like this is a crucial moment for his character. Because so she's like slowly sinking. By the time he jumps in, she's gone, right? But it takes a long time because he quit being a firefighter. He was so afraid of death that he chose to stop living. And it was in the moment, it was in the freedom from being afraid of death. He now knows he's going to die, that he gets on this boat. But he was supposed to die in weeks, right? He's supposed to die at a planned time. And he's looking at this person and he chooses to risk for her. And so, unbeknownst to the devilish character, he's already kind of met his moment. And more importantly, he meets God. And he says, thank you. He says, thank you for my life. And that is the response we should have when we encounter God, is that, thank you for my life. He's looking at a moon. He's met God, right? So here we go to this island, and every 100 years, someone is supposed to jump in for their brothers and sisters, and none of them will do it. And here's this man who has been bought and paid for by a man who has lots to gain if the island continues, but who has already, one, agreed to give his life, but more importantly, he's already preempted this moment by jumping into a stormy waves to save someone's life and nearly died in the process. And so I kind of feel like it's the volcano's judgment of the island and of the Crossroads devil by rejecting, but not because he's not acceptable, because he's too acceptable. You cannot hire a hero. If you're going to be someone that lays down your life for your brothers, you need to be one of the brothers. And none of them could do it. And so the volcano, and anyway, there's lots of beautiful observations. I love how he says to her, when he asks Dee, he says, the important thing to know the universe, he's like talking so fast, it could feel like he's on speed, is to know yourself. If you know you, if you know me, like we'll know the universe. And she's like, what? And then he gets to the boat and he's like, do you believe in God? And she's like, I believe in myself. And he's like, I can't be interested in myself. I've been trying to think about myself and I could not be more bored. I'm interested in courage, right? The thing that he lost. And you see her ask for a miracle, right? So I feel like you watch both of their characters arc and grow, and she chooses, she was going to die for that boat, and he saves her from that, and now she's choosing to die for love of a man. So they're rejected. But to answer your question, I think the offer with regards to all the money and now when you're going to die, now you get to pick it. It freed him from the fear of death in order to live for a while. But as soon as he didn't get to jump in, it comes back. And but he did choose to risk his life for another before that moment happened. So I agree that he's not cured, like done and done, but I think that we're on the path to healing. I think really important things have happened.
So I haven't seen the movie, and I'm really annoyed that the marketing was so deceptive, because I think I would have seen it probably. But especially at that time, it's like another movie with Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan. I'm like, they must all be the same because the ad looks like they're all the same. And so I never looked into it, but I will watch it now. But having watched two movies where the clock gets set, where you know the time of your death and how they treat them, and the most resonant for me was, and so maybe someone knows the title of this, because it's a Jerry Lewis movie where he's told he's gonna die, and he goes out and lives it up, and he's living it up the whole movie. And at the end, you realize he's been telling the whole story from a gurney, and his last scene living it up was he's marlin fishing. And he's fighting this marlin, and the marlin jumps, and then you cut back to him telling the story, and the marlin is sticking through his chest. And he's on an operating table, he's telling the story to a bunch of surgeons. And that's how they ended the movie. And I thought, oh my gosh, apparently these filmmakers think that death is absurd because they'll end it right there. But the absurdity of this movie, after they spit people out, he still was to learn something afterwards. So I'm still wondering, like, what do you think the filmmaker, what's his ultimate thing to say about death and how we should face it? And what do you think he thinks, having seen the movie?
Well, I think I kind of, what I was reading into, and the thing is your step of faith, to jump out into the volcano itself. Whatever the ending is, I mean, as a filmmaker, that's what I was watching and going, the end result, whatever it would have been, them being rocketed out of the volcano, but to take the leap of faith and to do it together, that's what I think is the most important part. As I think that's what the filmmaker was going, but I think he let people off the hook and let the rest of the story go. I mean, I would have, but I'm a dark soul in that sense, a filmmaker. I would have had him jumped off and I would have went to black.
Was it ultimately a comedy?
It was.
Ultimately,
ultimately, but honestly.
Or a tragedy, or a.
It was a comedy.
I've learned something.
It ends in you catastrophe.
Oh, it ends in marriage?
They get married.
Well, they got married before.
Oh, and the other question I wanted to ask you is, what do you think they did with the rest of their life after the last frame of film?
They lived away from the.
Well, if it started with,
Far from the things of man.
Far from the things
of man.
So Dr. Phillips said if it started with Once Upon a Time, it must have ended with Happily Ever
It
After.
does. It does. It has a title card that comes up and says, "And they lived happily ever after."
In case you missed it,
Yes.
put a title card. Thank you to the filmmaker.
I really appreciate you guys doing this. This is a fascinating discussion. And I remember when that came out, it was actually a giant box office flop. And it's so interesting that you guys are kind of piecing this together. I think you have much more interesting takes in trying to stitch this together necessarily than the filmmaker had. I think a lot of this is an existential kind of 90s extravaganza to try to find some kind of search for meaning, but it was interesting to see that he starts out seeking, but doesn't ever really find, even with that encounter with God, he still, like you said, he still gets sick at the end. He still feels that, and it's fascinating that encounter doesn't change him enough that he's unable to kind of overcome that feeling of getting sick again. I just had a quick question for you guys. Do you have any feeling why they used Meg Ryan constantly as that character? Do you think that was, I wonder if it was originally written that way for the same actress to play that, or is that just trying to, in the package deal with both Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan, to get more of Meg Ryan? I would have loved to have that played a story a little bit more to see, is it a Wizard of Oz kind of thing or something like that?
he's the writer-director, so obviously he wrote it that way and wanted that specifically that way. So there's so many commentaries you can get online, and there's commentaries why. But I think it's different relationships. We spoke about it earlier, in threes, and I thought that was a great analysis of that. Is a physical relation and emotional relationship that you can't get, but in the third, he had both. You know, he found that kind of a relationship, but it was within the same kind of context of a similar face, something that he was looking for. So visually, I mean, if I was reading into it as a director, by using those three same characters, someone that you're very attracted to physically, somebody that you want to save and take care of emotionally, and in the very end, you are taking care of emotionally and attracted to physically, and it's the same character but just kind of looks different. That's the way I was reading into it as a filmmaker. If anybody else saw different things, I would love to hear.
I love that. I would only add that, I would add two things. One, just another Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan movie. I will have you know, sir, that of the 3 Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan films that we have been blessed to have, all 3 of them have worthy storylines that you should sit and think about. And no, don't even try and walk it back. Well,
This was also
just
the first
another
one.
Meg Ryan, Tom Hanks film. I'm just saying.
This is also the first one.
This is.
That's the way the
I know.
marketing. I argue with a microphone. Never argue with someone who
only
has a
fair,
microphone
yeah.
or gallons of ink. No, I was in the time of the day. It seemed like they came in threes.
Sure.
And I didn't think of those that way, but it is like when you, and even casting her, am I to understand she played 3 different characters in the
Yes.
movie? Yeah. I mean, that's very intentional and everything. To have cast 2 other people for it would have changed the complete complexion. But those guys had a thing going on, though, that was box office gold.
Horrible marketing. It was horrible marketing, because when they were doing it, remember, rom-coms were coming out then. They were coming out right and left. That was when the start of the rom-coms. So everybody was like, hey, we can go get this, and we're going to go see this. It fooled everybody when they went to go watch this, going, wait a minute, this is a lot deeper meaning. So there's more to this film than just a simple little rom-com. And that, I mean, I don't want to go. We'll go further later.
So the only other thing I would say on that, though, is that you have that idea of the it's not even recycle. It's almost a recollection kind of throwback to I don't. It's not exactly the idea of a reincarnate or a platonic idea that's coming through, but it also does make me think every time of a sort of, did I ever tell you that the first time, he tells all 3 of the Meg Ryans, did I ever tell you that the first time I saw you, I thought I'd seen you before? Because there's this idea that somehow this is the thing, you are someone I've been looking for my entire life. Without going into the sort of overly done soulmate nonsense of, oh no, you complete me. Because again, this is not a romantic movie where the woman just instantly completes him and he's fine now. His quest is not to find the romantic love that will solve his problems and complete him as a person, but he has been looking for someone. It does keep going back around. And so there's that idea of like, there's something deeper there. There's an eternal desire.
Yeah, I was just going to say about the women being all the same woman. There's definitely a hair change. I think that's important to note. It's humorous, but Dee Dee having black hair, starting in that opening scene with the, blue, black, sort of depressing opening scenes. It gets a little lighter when they get out to Los Angeles. And then finally with Patricia being blonde, obviously blondes have more fun or whatever, but I think that there is some symbolism there. There's just more light in her. I think we see also a similar quality with each woman, like their hand, what happens with the hand holding. The first one, she has a clenched fist, which was weird, but the second one, she's talking about her empty hand in the hair poem. And then the third one, like fully open, and not only open, but like together. So I feel like there's definitely a progression.
And she starts moving her hand toward his in a fist so that you don't miss the visual similarity to Dee Dee, but then she opens it.
Yeah. So it's just kind of neat to see how the progression happens in the hair and the hands.
All right, it's getting late, so let's do one last question. No problem.
I was actually going to address your question, and also the lightning bolt, kind of together, just because it just struck me like the whole beginning part with the drones, and it's like a sea of humanity, like just standing for a symbol of man. And then I was thinking about the cracks and the lightning bolt and how it cracked the ship as well, the yacht. And it just made me think of how our lives are cracked. You know, that life, especially without God, life without God is cracked. It's broken. And that's his problem in the beginning too. He's lost and he's broken and he has no purpose in life. And when we are not believers, we live life with no purpose, no real true purpose, and we're lost. And life is totally cracked. And yet, in Isaiah, God says that he makes the crooked paths straight. And I was also thinking how, like, in the storm, it shows lightning, and lightning is often, you know, a symbol for what the acts of God, you know, a finger of God, things like that. Just kind of that background God setting again. And I was startled. I've never seen this movie, and I was totally startled when he addressed God. You know, you don't see that today in secular movies, especially with Tom Hanks and Meg. Right? You know, like you don't see them talking to God and thanking God for their life. That was pretty amazing, and it just feels like there's a shift. So whether it's an unbeliever's life of lostness, and we see that in Angelica, you know, total lostness and despondency, a fear of life, and so you have people who are maybe thinking they're living life. Even the crazy manic scene with Dee Dee and him in the beginning, right? And she's like, "What is happening with you?" And they're, you know, they think that they're living life, like, and it's almost manic, and they're doing all the things, and you have the beautiful music and the beautiful moment or whatever, but it's not real. And then just the color, right, and the life that comes in, and just made me. And then the end, right, where I was startled too, to see him kind of revert back, because we hadn't seen a hint of that person for a long time, when he was now going off to be the hero, thinking he had nothing left to lose, really. So now I'm going to live life. I have nothing to fear. Like he had told, well, the thing he had said to Angelica in the car was, oh, no, yeah, why don't you take the thing that you're most afraid of and do that, right? And so now that he has nothing he's afraid of, he's actually going to go live life, and he's going to do the greatest thing. The greatest thing is for a man to lay down his life for another, right? And he's going to go do that. But then he reverts, and I was surprised because I hadn't seen that part of him, and I thought, what is that? You know, and I wondered. I think of the verse 2 that talks about how God says he will not delight in the one that shrinks back. Like, we are not supposed to shrink back. Like, we're not supposed to go back to who we were, or like the Israelites looking back to Egypt. You know, when God saves you and you have salvation, when they're miraculously, you know, given new life, given a second chance and, you know, new life, you're not supposed to go backwards. You're supposed to move forward. And then I love that you said that about the luggage, about how it's grace. Yeah, I was thinking about that too, how it's this unexpected kindness, this grace throughout the film. And then I thought, you know, as Christians, whatever we're called to do, God promises we will be equipped to do whatever that is. And we do have this grace that follows us along life everywhere we go. So we don't have to fear. And wherever they end up going in the end of the movie, like us, wherever we end up going, just remember, we have this luggage, right? He says we have to bring that wherever we go. Well, we as Christians do have that wherever we go, because we have God's favor, we have our Father's love, we have our Father's plan, we have him making the crooked paths straight, best for us, because life is crooked. Like, I don't know how many of you here planned your life exactly to get to this point in time today, or how many of us look back and see all the turns and twists and things that we did not anticipate at all to get to where we are, and we're still going. And I love that too. You have your whole life ahead of you. And then it made me think, oh, I've been feeling kind of old. I have my whole life ahead of me, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not done. I have life to live. And then I have this this grace that will follow me everywhere I go, even when I'm in the middle of a lost ocean thinking I have nothing. God is there. I always have something. God is always going to show up for me, and he will always take care of me in even miraculous ways like we saw in the film.
Thank you so much for that. And thank you to all of you for coming out. Let's also thank our panel for their wonderful work and preparation. And thanks for coming out to support Trinity tonight.